1%. It sounds like a number somebody made up for a thumbnail. It isn't. There's exactly one moment in Scripture where God takes a crowd and cuts it down on purpose. 32,000 men reduced to 300. 0.94%. You can check it yourself. And here's the part nobody preaches. Nobody was asked to give anything. Nobody was told to sow. The final cut had nothing to do with what those men contributed at all. It came down to something so small they never knew they were being watched. God watched them drink water, and the ones who got sent home drank the way you and I would. Before we get there, two more things you need to have in your hands. There's a verse everybody quotes about this. Everybody quotes it starting in the middle. There's a first half, and it changes which direction the money is moving, and there's a man. He built the entire movement this teaching came out of, and he spent the end of his life arguing it was wrong. 3 pieces. I'm going to lay them down in that order, because the third one doesn't land until you've seen the first 2. So let's start with the verse. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. You've heard it, on a church wall, in a caption, in a sermon where the preacher leaned into the microphone and said it slowly, like he was handing you something. The wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. That's the line. That's the one that gets quoted. And every time I've heard it quoted, every single time, it starts right there. Which is strange, because that's not where the verse starts. There's a first half. It's sitting right in front of the part everybody uses, and it's not hiding. It's not in the original Hebrew or buried in a footnote. It's just there, on the same line, and people step over it to get to the money. Here's the whole thing. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Children's children, not his children, his children's children. Read that slowly, because there's a whole worldview packed into 3 words. A good man builds something that doesn't finish arriving until 2 generations after he's gone. He will never see it. He will never hold the thing he built. He plants for people whose names he doesn't know yet. That's the first half of this verse. That's what it's about. Patience so long it outlives the person practicing it. And then, in the very same breath, in the very same sentence, the second half turns and looks at the other kind of man. Now here's the part I want you to sit with. Almost every culture on earth has a saying about the 3rd generation. In America they say, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. Grandfather works in his shirt sleeves and builds it. Father wears the suit. Grandson is back in his shirt sleeves. In Scotland they said clogs to clogs, same idea, different shoes. In China, there's a phrase that translates almost word for word. Wealth does not pass 3 generations. In Brazil, rich father, noble son, poor grandson. Japan has one, Italy has one. Now I want to be careful here because I'm not going to tell you that's a scientific finding. Nobody ran a study, nobody controlled for anything. These are things people noticed. They watched families rise and watched families fall, and they watched it happen often enough, in places that had never met each other, in languages that had never touched, that they all reached for a saying about it. Different continents, different centuries, same number, 3. So look at the verse again. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. He gets to the 3rd generation. And the whole world wrote down a warning about what usually happens at exactly that point. Which tells you something about what this verse is actually measuring. It's not measuring size. It's not measuring how much anybody has. It's measuring how long it stays. One kind of wealth travels forward. It survives the death of the man who made it, and the death of his son, and it's still standing when a grandchild he never met walks into it. The other kind doesn't survive its owner. And notice what the verse does not say. It doesn't say, the wealth of the sinner is taken. Nobody seizes it, nobody kicks down a door. It's laid up, stored, gathered, piled higher and higher by a man who is absolutely certain it's his, right up until the moment it isn't. The wealth of the sinner isn't stolen from him, it leaks. Now, does that make the promise smaller? No, but it does make it a different shape than the one you've been sold. Because if this verse is describing a slow leak that runs across generations, a current that's been moving the whole time, then it was never a lottery ticket. It was never a date on a calendar. Which raises the question nobody asks. Has this ever actually happened? Not as a sermon, not as a promise, as an event, something with a place and a time, and people who were standing there when it happened. Because if this is a pattern God actually runs, there should be a record. There is. It happened once on a scale that nothing in human history has matched since. An entire population walked out of the wealthiest nation on earth, carrying that nation's silver and gold, handed to them willingly by the people who had owned them for 400 years. And the strangest part isn't that it happened, it's that they almost said no. Egypt, 400 years. Let me try to make that number mean something, because we say it so fast it stops registering. 400 years ago from today, there was no United States, no electricity in anyone's home. Most people had never seen a printed book. That's the distance. That's how long this had been going on. Which means the people standing in Egypt on the last night were not slaves who remembered freedom. They were slaves whose grandparents' had been slaves. Freedom wasn't a memory they were trying to get back to. It was a story, something an old woman told you when you were small and you weren't entirely sure she hadn't made it up. They made bricks. Their fathers made bricks. Every single person they had ever loved had made bricks and then died making them. And on the other side of the wall, Egypt got richer. Temples went up, tombs filled with gold, and every ounce of it was paid for with work these people did with their hands, for nothing. That's the room we're standing in. Now here is what happens. Exodus chapter 12, the last night. And the text says the Israelites asked the Egyptians for silver and for gold and for clothing, and the Egyptians gave it to them. Not sold, not lent, gave. The text says they gave them what they asked for, and Israel walked out of that country carrying it. The King James translation says it a little differently. It says they spoiled the Egyptians, which sounds like looting. It wasn't. Nobody kicked down a door. Nobody drew a weapon. The people who had owned them for 4 centuries opened their own hands and handed over the gold. That's the event. That's the record. And most people stop the story right there, because right there it's beautiful. But go back 3 chapters, because before any of this happens, God does something that has bothered me for years. He tells them it's coming. Chapter 11. Before the last plague, before the last night, God says to Moses, "Speak to the people and have every man ask his neighbor for silver and gold." He gives them advance notice, a heads up, a warning. And I want you to actually stop and ask why that would be necessary. These are slaves, 400 years of nothing. Not one of them owns anything. Someone walks up and offers them silver. You don't need a briefing for that. You take it. That's not a decision, that's a reflex. So why the warning? There's only one reason you warn someone that a good thing is coming. Because there's a real chance they'll refuse it. Now I want to be careful here. The text doesn't spell that out. It doesn't say, "and God knew they would say no." I'm reading the instruction and asking what it implies, and you're free to weigh that yourself. But think about who these people were. If you have spent your entire life being taken from, you do not develop a talent for receiving. You develop a talent for suspicion. Every good thing that ever came out of an Egyptian's hand came with a price attached, and the price was always worse than the gift. So a man walks up to you on the last night and he's holding out silver and he's not smiling. what is your first thought? It isn't thank you, it's what does he want? And I think that's the whole reason for the warning. Not because they were greedy, because they were braced. 400 years of bracing for the next blow, and now something is being placed in your hands, and your entire body is telling you it's a trap. There's a word people use for this in ordinary life, and you've probably felt it yourself. You've met someone who couldn't take a compliment, who flinched when it came and made a joke and pushed it away. Nobody would call that pride. Everyone knows what it actually is. Somebody who's been criticized long enough that praise sounds like the opening of an attack. Same reflex, bigger stakes. 400 years of being taken from doesn't just teach you to work, it teaches you to flinch when someone gives. And that flinch is the reason God had to warn them, not to prepare them for the wealth, to prepare them to recognize it. Because a hand that's been closed for 400 years does not open on its own, not even for gold. Especially not for gold. So there it is. It happened. Once on a scale nothing has matched since. It's in the record. It has a date. It has a place. And the wealth moved exactly the way that verse said it would. And if it happened once, that's a story. But it didn't happen once. It happened again with Jacob, who walked into a contract designed to cheat him and walked out with his father-in-law's herds. It happened again with an army that marched out to fight and never swung a sword and spent 3 days carrying away what was left and still couldn't take it all. It happened again in Job, again in Isaiah, 5 times, 5 separate accounts, different centuries, different men, and every one of them ends with wealth in the hands of someone who didn't build it. Which is where I stopped being comfortable. Because when I laid all 5 of them side by side and looked at what came before the money moved, they had something in common. Every single one. And it's the one detail that never makes it into the sermon. 5 accounts. Let me put them next to each other, fast, and then show you what's sitting underneath all of them. Jacob. 20 years working for a man who kept changing the terms. Genesis says Laban changed his wages 10 times. 10. Every time Jacob got close to something, the deal moved. And at the end of those 20 years, Jacob walks away with the stronger half of Laban's herds. The man who spent 2 decades getting cheated leaves wealthier than the man doing the cheating. 20 years. Hold that number. Jehoshaphat, 2 Chronicles 20. 3 armies coming at a country that has no chance. And the king does something strange. He doesn't call for weapons. He calls the whole nation together and tells them plainly, we have no power against this and we don't know what to do. They march out. And the enemy armies turn on each other. By the time Israel gets there, it's over. And the text says they spent 3 days carrying away the spoil. 3 days and they still couldn't take it all. But notice what came first. A king standing in front of his people, in public, saying we don't know what to do. Job, chapter 27. The wicked man heaps up silver like dust and piles up clothing like clay, and the just will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. That's the promise. And you know where Job was sitting when he said it. He'd lost his children, his health, everything he owned. He says that line from the ash heap. Isaiah, chapter 60. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. Written to a people about to spend 70 years in exile in Babylon. 70. Most of the people who first heard that promise died before anything about it came true. And Egypt, 400 years, which we just walked through. Now, look at what those 5 have in common. 20 years, 3 armies and no plan, an ash heap, 70 years in exile. 400 years of bricks. Every single one of these stories has a long, brutal middle, and in every one the wealth shows up on the far side of it. There is not one case, not one, where somebody was sitting comfortably, believed the right thing, and money arrived. That's not a small detail. That's the shape of the whole pattern. and it's the part that never makes it into the sermon because it doesn't fit on a graphic. In Scripture, the wealth always comes after the wilderness, never instead of it. Now here's where I have to be honest with you about something. The moment I saw that, a second thing showed up that I couldn't get rid of. If the pattern is real, if the wilderness comes first, then every one of these accounts happened to a specific person in a specific century, and God said something to them directly. Nobody in these 5 stories was handed a general promise about the last days. Jacob wasn't, Job wasn't, Jehoshaphat wasn't. They got a particular word at a particular moment for a particular crisis. So the question is whether you can take 5 accounts like that, stack them up, and turn them into a global forecast about our generation. And I want you to know I'm not the first person to ask that. The man who asked it before me is the reason we're even having this conversation. Now, before we get to him, I owe you something. At the very start of this, I told you about a crowd that God cut down to almost nothing. 32,000 men down to 300. What I didn't tell you is that it didn't happen in one step. It happened in 2. And the first cut is the bigger one. 22,000 men went home before anybody ever got near the water. 22,000 in a single announcement before the real test even started. They weren't sent home for anything they did wrong. They weren't disloyal. They didn't fail a character test. They were sent home because of what they were feeling. And I'll come back to that because it lands better once you've seen the rest. But I want you holding it because it changes what the water was even for. If 22,000 were already gone before the water, then the water wasn't sorting the crowd. It was sorting the ones who had already survived the first cut. Okay, back to him. Because everything I've laid out so far, the verse, Egypt, the pattern, all 5 accounts, there's a man who looked at exactly this material and reached the opposite conclusion. And he wasn't a skeptic. He wasn't an outsider. He wasn't a critic writing from a seminary somewhere. He is the reason this teaching exists at all. Nearly every preacher you've heard talk about the end-time transfer of wealth learned their vocabulary from him. Their verses, their framing, their entire theology of money traces back to one man, and most of them will tell you so proudly. And he spent the last stretch of his life writing against it. He used a verse none of them quote. He said the church chasing the world's money had the assignment backwards, and he pointed at the exact weakness I just showed you, that you cannot build a doctrine this size on a foundation this thin. He was not a small figure. He built a movement, and he watched his own students take the thing he taught them and turn it into something he said was never in the Bible. Before I tell you who he is, you need to know how big he was. He started with almost nothing. A preacher out of Texas, small rooms, small crowds, decades of it. By the end, he had a Bible school that put tens of thousands of ministers into pulpits around the world. He wrote more than 100 books, and if you have ever heard a preacher say that God does not want his people broke, that faith has something to do with your finances, that language did not start with the man you heard it from. It came through him first. He is, more than any other single person, the reason this conversation exists at all. His name is Kenneth Hagin, and near the end of his life, he wrote a book about the prosperity movement he had spent 40 years building. Not a defense of it, a correction of it. And in that book, he takes direct aim at the end-time transfer of wealth. He said it wasn't there. Here's the first thing he said. You cannot build a doctrine this size on one verse. That was his objection, and he backed it with scripture. The principle Jesus gave, that a matter is established by 2 or 3 witnesses. Hagin said he had always been careful about any foundational belief that rested on a single line of text, and that's exactly what this is. Proverbs 13:22, carrying the entire weight. Everything else gets stacked on top of it afterward. Then he does something that I think is the real problem. He goes to the New Testament. Because think about it. If a global transfer of wealth to the church is a last days event, the New Testament is where you'd expect to find it. That's the part of the Bible written to the church. That's where the last days get discussed directly. And it isn't there. What is there is 3 John verse 7. The apostles went out for the sake of the name, and the verse says they took nothing from the Gentiles. Nothing. That's the first generation of the church. That's the original model, the one everything else is supposed to be measured against. They went into the wealthiest cities in the Roman world, and their policy, written down, preserved right there in the text, was that they did not take the money of the nations. Now ask yourself something. You have heard sermons on this subject, maybe dozens. Have you ever once heard anybody read that verse out loud? And then Hagin says the thing that I think is the center of all of it. He said our job is not to try to get the wealth of the world. Our job is to faithfully use the wealth we already have. Read that again. He didn't say wealth is bad. He didn't say God can't move money. He said the assignment got turned around. That a church spending its energy trying to capture what somebody else is holding has stopped doing the one thing it was actually given. Now, I need to stop and say something to you directly because I know how this lands. Kenneth Hagin was not a critic. He was not a skeptic. He was not some professor picking apart a movement he'd never been part of. He believed in God's provision until the day he died. He never walked it back. He wasn't sitting in judgment on prosperity. He had preached it his whole life. And he wasn't calling anybody a liar. Read the book and you can hear what it actually is. It's a man watching people he trained take the thing he handed them and carry it somewhere he never meant it to go. He wasn't accusing them of lying. He was saying the thing he gave them had been carried further than he ever set it down. And if you have believed this teaching, I want to be clear, that does not make you gullible. You believed it because it was taught to you by people you had good reason to trust. Some of them were sincere, most of them probably. They inherited it the same way you did, and nobody ever handed them the objection either. That's not a failure of faith, that's just how teaching travels. But it does leave us with a question that I've never heard answered well. This has been preached for 40 years now. Conferences, books, entire ministries built around it, millions of people believing for it, praying for it, positioning for it. If a global transfer of wealth to the church were actually underway, the church would be the wealthiest institution on earth by now. Look around. Congregations are closing, buildings are being sold, pastors are working second jobs. That's not what a transfer looks like. And yet, there is something moving right now, something enormous. It's the largest transfer of wealth in recorded human history. It's happening while you're watching this, and it is not happening inside the church. I'll come back to that, because it changes the shape of this entirely, and you need one more piece before it makes sense. Because right now you're probably sitting with the obvious question, if the founder of the movement said it wasn't there, is the promise dead? Was the verse just wrong? No, the verse is fine. The verse has always been fine. What went wrong is that we picked it up and read it as the wrong kind of writing. We treated it like a prophecy, a prediction with a date attached, waiting to trigger. It was never that. It's a different genre entirely, and every argument I've laid out for the last 7 minutes only works if you read it the way we've been reading it. Read it the way it was actually written, and the objection dissolves, and the promise doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger. There are 66 books in the Bible, and they are not all the same kind of writing. That sounds obvious. It isn't, because most of us never got taught it. Genesis is history, Psalms is poetry, Revelation is apocalyptic, a genre with its own rules, which is why people have argued about it for 2,000 years. And Proverbs is something else again. Proverbs is wisdom literature. Here's what that means, and it's the whole thing. Wisdom literature doesn't make promises, it makes observations. It's a record of how the world usually runs. Not a contract, not a guarantee with your name on it, and you already know this even if nobody's ever said it to you. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. Now, is that a guarantee? Ask any pastor who has sat with a mother whose son walked away from everything she raised him in. She did it right. She did all of it right, and he left anyway. Is the verse wrong? No. The verse is telling you the truth about how the world generally works. Raise a child well and it usually holds. Usually, not always. Treat it as a guarantee and it will break your heart. Treat it as wisdom and it will guide your life. Wisdom tells you which way the river runs. It doesn't promise you a boat. Now take that back to our verse. The wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Read as prophecy, that's a prediction, something scheduled, a date on a calendar, waiting to trigger. Read as wisdom, which is what it is, sitting in the book of wisdom, in the middle of a chapter of other wisdom sayings. It's saying something completely different. It's telling you which way the river runs. Wealth built on nothing doesn't stay. It leaks. It always has. It moves out of the hands that gathered it and into other hands, and that has been happening every day for 3,000 years. And that's not a mystical claim. Watch it happen. A man builds a company by cutting every corner he can find, and it's gone in a decade, sold off in pieces, and the pieces end up with the people who did it slowly. Lottery winners. You know this statistic. Enormous sums, and a huge share of it gone within a few years, and the money doesn't evaporate. It goes somewhere. Somebody is holding it now. An empire is built on conquest, and 3 generations later the grandchildren are selling the paintings. Remember the proverb we started with? Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. Wealth doesn't pass 3 generations. Every culture on earth noticed this, and none of them called it prophecy. They called it what it is. It's the river. It's been running the whole time. And this is where the objection dissolves. Because Hagin was right. You can't build an end times event on one verse. But he wasn't arguing with the verse. He was arguing with the reading. Take the calendar away, and there's nothing left to argue about. Nobody has to defend a date. Nobody has to explain why it hasn't happened yet. There's no failed prediction to make excuses for. Because it isn't scheduled, it's already running. And now watch what happens to the question. If this is an event with a date, the only question that matters is when. When does it start? What sign comes first? What year? That's a question you can only wait on. But if it's a current, if wealth has been moving out of closed hands and into other hands this entire time, every day, right past you, then when was never the question. The question is who? Who is standing there when it goes by? Who is in a position to catch it? Who does it actually land on? And that's a completely different kind of question. Because that one isn't about the calendar, that one's about you. Which brings me back to something I owe you. Earlier I told you about the first cut. 22,000 men sent home before anyone got near the water. Here's why that matters now. They weren't sent home for sin. Nobody checked their record. Nobody weighed their giving. Nobody asked what they'd sacrificed or how long they'd served. The text is almost blunt about it. They were sent home because they were afraid. That's it. That's the whole criterion for the first cut. And I want you to notice what that rules out. It rules out worthiness. Because if God was sorting that crowd by who deserved to be there, he had every tool available. He could have checked their obedience, their offerings, their family lines. He didn't check any of it. Both cuts, the first one and the one after it, measured something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with whether those men had earned their place. And that's the thing that never gets preached, because it doesn't sell. You're not being sorted by whether you're good enough. 10,000 men made it past the first cut. 10,000 men who stayed when the afraid ones went home. And 9,700 of them were about to be sent home too, not for fear. That test was over. For something so small that not one of them knew it was happening. They were thirsty, and they walked down to the water. Now, the water. Judges chapter 7. Gideon has 10,000 men left, and God says there are still too many. And the test God gives is so strange that people have argued about the mechanics of it for centuries. Take them down to the water, let them drink, and watch how they do it. Some of them got down on their knees, put their faces to the stream, and drank the way you drink from a fountain, head down, eyes on the water. The others stayed on their feet. They brought the water up to their mouths with their hands and drank out of their palms. 300 men drank standing. 9,700 went home. Now, nobody told them this was a test. There was no announcement. They were soldiers on a march, and they were thirsty, and they went down to a stream. That's all it was to them. Which is the first thing worth sitting with. Every one of those men was being measured in a moment he thought was nothing. But here's the part that matters. What is the actual difference between those two groups? It isn't strength. You can't tell how strong a man is by how he drinks. It isn't loyalty. Every one of these 10,000 had already stayed when 22,000 walked away. It isn't holiness, and it isn't what they'd given, and it isn't their family line. None of that got checked. Not once in either cut. The difference is this. The man on his knees with his face in the water can't see anything. For those few seconds his eyes are on the stream. Not on the hills, not on the tree line, not on the men beside him. The man drinking out of his hand still has his head up. He's drinking, he's getting the same water, he's meeting the same need, but he never stopped watching. That's the whole test. One group was drinking, the other group was drinking and still paying attention. And I want to be careful here because commentators have debated the details of this passage for a long time, and I'm not going to pretend it's settled. Some read it as alertness, some read it as discipline, some think the point is simply that God picked an arbitrary marker to prove the victory wasn't about the army. But every reading lands in the same neighborhood. Whatever that test measured, it wasn't merit, it was posture. And you can see it in the number itself. 32,000 down to 300. Run it, that's under 1%. Not because 99% were disqualified for wrongdoing, because 99% weren't watching. Now go back to Egypt with me for 1 second, because this is where it connects. Why did God warn them the wealth was coming? Not to prepare them for the gold, to prepare them to recognize it. 400 years of being taken from teaches you to flinch when someone gives. So God tells them in advance, this is going to happen, and when it does, don't mistake it for a trap. Same criterion, different century. Not are you worthy, not have you given enough. Are you awake when it comes? And this is what chosen actually means in that story, which is not what it's usually sold as. Those 300 weren't better men. They didn't have better weapons. They were given torches and clay jars and trumpets, which is not a weapons upgrade. It's the opposite. They weren't stronger. They weren't more deserving. They were the ones still looking up. That's it. That's the whole qualification. So if you've been carrying the question, am I one of them? I want to give you the honest answer, because there's an entire industry built on telling you yes for the price of a seed offering. The honest answer is that the question is wrong. It isn't a category you're in or out of. Nobody sorted you at birth. There's no list. It's a posture, and you can be in it today and out of it tomorrow and back in it by Friday. 10,000 men passed the first cut. They were brave, they stayed, And most of them still went home, not because they failed, but because in one ordinary moment, when they were tired and thirsty and nobody was watching, they put their heads down. Chosen wasn't something they were, it was something they were doing when it counted. Which means the real question was never, am I one of the 300? It's simpler and harder. What are you looking at right now? Because here's why I've spent 38 minutes on this. The largest transfer of wealth in recorded human history is happening right now. Not in prophecy, not in a sermon, in the financial press, in the data, this week, while you're watching this. Tens of trillions of dollars are moving from one generation to the next, and it has already started, and most people are going to miss it completely. Not because they weren't chosen, for exactly the reason 9,700 men were sent home from a stream in Israel. Let me give you the number, and then let me tell you what's wrong with the number. For years, the figure everyone quoted was $84 trillion. That's out of date. The firm that produced it, Cerulli Associates, revised it upward, and their current projection is about $124 trillion moving through 2048. 105 trillion of that goes to heirs, 18 trillion goes to charity. And nearly 100 trillion of it, 81%, comes out of the hands of baby boomers and older. Groupim's Cerulli Associates. That's not prophecy, that's an accounting firm. Right now it's running at roughly $4 trillion a year, and it's projected to peak around $6 trillion a year in the mid-2030s. Journey advisory. Not someday, this year, last year, today, now. Before you do anything with that number, 3 things you need to know, and the third one is the one that matters. First, the experts don't agree. Visa's economics group ran their own analysis and came out at 36 trillion, actually reaching Gen X and millennial households, because once you subtract what people spend in retirement, plus taxes, plus liabilities, most of that headline number never arrives at anybody's door. CNBC, a $60 trillion gap between 2 serious institutions. I'm not going to pretend I can settle that. I'm telling you it's contested, because anybody who quotes you the big number without mentioning the argument is selling you something. Second, and this one stopped me, more than half of that entire transfer, $62 trillion of it, comes from households that make up 2% of the population. Cerulli Associates. Read that again, 2% of households, more than half the money. There is a 1% in this story, it's just not a spiritual category. Third, and this is the part nobody puts in a headline, the largest intergenerational transfer in American history is underway, and most Americans will inherit little, if anything at all. Gulf News. I'm not going to soften that for you. That is what the data says. If this teaching has had you waiting on a windfall, the numbers do not support the wait. So what does any of this have to do with a verse in Proverbs? Everything, but not the way it's been sold to you, because look at what the data actually confirms. Wealth is not sitting still, it is in motion, at enormous scale, right now. Roughly 80% of today's wealth is going into movement, and it is passing out of hands that have held it for decades. Gulf News. The river is real, that part was never in question. What the data also says plainly is that it is not flowing toward you because you believed correctly. There is no mechanism for that. There never was. And here, nearly 40 trillion of it moves sideways first, to widowed women in the boomer generation and older. Cerulli Associates. Think about who that is. Some of you watching this are that woman, or you're going to be. Somebody is going to hand you a decision you did not ask for and were never trained for in the worst year of your life. That's what this looks like up close. Not a windfall, a responsibility arriving at the worst possible moment. Which brings me to the thing I actually want you to take out of this video. Because there are people who will use everything I just told you to take money from you. So here's how you spot them. 3 tests. They work every time. 1. If they ask you to give in order to receive, to sow a seed, plant now, activate it. Close the tab. Go back through every account we looked at. Egypt, Jacob, Jehoshaphat, Job. Not one person paid anything to receive. Not once. If it costs you money to qualify, you're not looking at scripture, you're looking at a business model. 2. If they give you a date, a year, a window, a before the end of this month, nobody has that. The verse never had that. 3. If they tell you you're chosen and the evidence they offer is that you're watching their video, that's the one that gets people. Because it feels like recognition. It feels like finally somebody saw you. 300 men at a stream in Israel were never told they were chosen. They found out afterward. Nobody handed them a title and then asked for a donation. Anything that sells you the identity before the assignment is selling you the identity. So there's the river, and it's real, and it's moving faster than at any point in recorded history. And there's the criterion, and it isn't worthiness, and it isn't money, which leaves exactly one question, and it's the only one I haven't answered. If it isn't about deserving it, and it isn't about paying for it, then what does an open hand actually look like on a Tuesday morning? An open hand on a Tuesday morning looks like almost nothing. It's the thing Hagin said, and it's the least exciting sentence in this whole video. Use faithfully what's already in your hand. Not what you're waiting for, what's there, which for most of us is small enough to be embarrassing. A paycheck that doesn't stretch, a skill nobody's paying for yet, an hour on a Tuesday. And I know how that sounds after 43 minutes about trillions of dollars, but go back to the 300 one more time. They weren't given better weapons. They got torches, clay jars and trumpets. That's not an upgrade. A clay jar is what you already have in your house. They weren't given more. They were the ones paying attention to what they had. That's the entire difference between the 300 and the 32,000. Not equipment, not worthiness, not what they gave. The 300 weren't holding anything the others weren't. They were just awake while they held it. So, don't wait for the transfer, that's the whole thing. Nothing in this story rewards waiting. Steward the small thing. Stay awake in the ordinary moment, because that's the only place any of these men were ever tested. And if something does pass through your hands one day, you'll already know what to do with it, because you'll have been doing it. There's one more piece of that story I didn't touch tonight, the first cut. 22,000 men sent home before anybody got near the water, sent home for fear. I've been thinking about that one for a while, because fear didn't make them bad soldiers, it made them honest ones. And I'm not sure God was disqualifying them at all. I think he was protecting them from something. That's a longer conversation. I'll see you in it.